Order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Gavin Robinson.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 1 and 2 together. The Government is working with the Northern Ireland Executive to help ensure the best outcome for Spirit Aerospace production and its skilled and hard-working staff in the current commercial negotiations.
State for his answer, Mr. Speaker, and welcome the fact that he has visited the site on a number of occasions. I understand, and he will know, the importance of Spirit Aerospace, not just for advanced manufacturing and, of course, aeronautical history in Northern Ireland, starting in 1908 as Short's Brothers. He will know that the plan at this stage is there is a purchaser for about 1/3 of the facility and 1/3 of the staff. But that fails to recognise the integration not just of the units and of the sites within Spirit Aerospace Northern Ireland, but also the importance to the supply chain in Northern Ireland. Will he join Unite and GMB in their call that government support a one-sale solution so that the integration of staff and workflows and supply chains continue to benefit for decades to come?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, and I agree with everything he said about the importance of the site and its history, in the end this is going to be a commercial outcome. Airbus want to buy the bit that makes the A220 wings because Airbus wants the site to produce more A220 wings, and Boeing is seeking a buyer for the rest of the production. And the right honourable gentleman will be well aware of what else is produced on site. And I continue to engage with all of those involved. But in the end, this is going to be a commercial decision. We want to see the production and the jobs remain, of course.
Gavin Robinson.
I am grateful for that response. The Secretary of State will know that the facility would not be there had it not been for government investment. In government support and guarantees were given not just to the people of Belfast but to the staff directly employed at Spirit Aerospace. So too the government have engaged in discussions around Harn-na-Wolff and Navantia and the Fleet Solid Support Ships. He will have shared the concern that I did yesterday about the news that the 4 yards across the United Kingdom would be going into administration. And he will know of the countless businesses who are owed tens of millions of pounds throughout the United Kingdom as part of that Fleet Solid Support Ship work. We want their viability to continue, and we know of individual businesses of family generation after generation have succeeded. So can he indicate his endeavour to make sure that their viability will be at the forefront of his mind so that we can deliver these Fleet Solid Support Ships in Belfast and Devon?
Secretary of State.
Well, the administration announcement is part of the process. It is the other side of the runway. It is part of the process for ensuring the takeover by Navantia, which is very good news. And the right honourable gentleman and I were there to celebrate that announcement, which provides security for the future. Ultimately, it's a commercial matter for Navantia how to relate to those suppliers, but I'm sure it wants to build a good relationship with firms that will help them at Harn-na-Wolff to build the 3 Fleet Solid Support Ships.
Katrina Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And whilst the purchase of and the contract with Airbus is very welcome, there's concern about the split of Spirit Aerospace plant in Belfast. Can I ask the Secretary of State for reassurance that wider defence and aerospace contracts held in Belfast by the non-Airbus part of Spirit, with contracts with companies such as Skyrora and my Cumbernauld and Kirkintilloch constituency, aren't put at risk because of it?
Well, I understand the concern that my honourable friend expresses, and we will know the answer to these questions when the commercial negotiations are concluded. But I will draw the attention of the particular issue she's raised to do with her constituency with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland.
To the Select Committee, Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has a visibly strong relationship with Airbus in relation to their presence in North Wales. And I wanted to know what representations the Secretary of State is making to ensure that there is equivalence in investment and for the workers in Spirit Aerospace in Belfast.
Well, I would say to my honourable friend, the fact that Airbus wants to acquire the A220 wing production and wants more A220 wings to be built in Belfast is, I think, a sign of their willingness to invest and to see that production grow and prosper.
Peter Swallow.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public services in Northern Ireland continue to fall behind, and the people of Northern Ireland deserve better. I raise this regularly with Northern Ireland ministers, including the Education and Health ministers, and the Government is fully committed to supporting the Executive to make the urgent reforms needed.
Peter Swallow.
Integrated education is an essential part of reconciliation. So does the Minister share my disappointment at the decision last week by the Northern Ireland Education Minister to reject the bids by Bangor Academy and Rashmore Primary to become integrated schools with the support of a majority of parents at those schools?
Minister.
Yes, I do. Integrated education is a devolved matter for the Executive. However, this Government is unapologetically supportive of integrated education. I've spoken to the head teachers of Bangor Academy and Rathmore Primary Schools this week, and they, as well as parents and pupils at the schools, are shocked by this decision. And I hope that the Education Minister will be working with them to resolve the concerns that he has, listen to parents who overwhelmingly want their children to benefit from integrated education.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks of transformation. When the Executive was restored this time last year, the Government put a pot of £234 million into transformation. A senior NIO official sits on that board. Mr. Speaker, to date, not one penny has been spent in supporting the transformation of either the health service or the education service. Can the Minister update what the hold-up is in regards to spending that money?
Minister.
I thank the member for raising the issue of the Public Service Transformation Board. So the interim board has, as he has said, £235 million budget for transformation. And there are several major projects now being sent to the Northern Ireland Minister of Finance for agreement on health, special education needs and justice. And I have pushed for the full board to be set up by the end of this financial year. It does need to move ahead and get those projects done. I agree.
Shadow Minister Mikewood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Executive has warned of very serious pressures facing the NHS in Northern Ireland, with the worst waiting times in the United Kingdom, more than 6 years for some surgeries. Labour's manifesto did commit to improving public services in Northern Ireland, and it's clear that money alone is unlikely to solve the problem. So what other tangible support will the Government offer the Executive to reduce waiting times for people in Northern Ireland, or will it just devolve and forget?
Minister.
The member is correct to raise the issue of public services, and especially for health. The winter pressures health on hospital care and other areas has been very shocking to see. And I'm very grateful to health workers for their work on the front line at the moment. This week I met with the UK Government Health Minister to talk about tangible ways, and we already have been supporting. As he says, funding is not the only answer. It's also about sharing that best practice, sharing expertise, and this Government is committed to do that through the Public Services Transformation Board, but also practical ways in which we can work together on the best ways to reform.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Dr Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With A&E waiting times in Northern Ireland now exceeding 12 hours in some hospitals, and with patients being treated in the back of hospitals because of a lack of beds for them to move into in hospitals, and with Dr Alan Stout, the chair of the BMA's Northern Ireland Council, telling the Northern Ireland Select Committee today that Northern Ireland is in a particularly bad place when it comes to health services. Can I ask the Secretary of State and the Minister, what conversations have they had with the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure that they have the resources that they need to cope with this immediate crisis? And are they convinced that the 124% fiscal floor is adequate for addressing this issue in the long term? Thank you.
Thank you. I have met with the Minister for Health, and I have been round and visited many of the healthcare provision services, all of which are feeling pressures at this time. This is a result of successive executives not tackling reform and being absent along the way. This is why we set up the Public Services Transformation Board. The executive faces huge challenges, and it's this Government's priority to work with them. The funding is there, the executive is committed, and they need to work together to urgently deliver change.
Claire Hannah.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will take questions 4 and 11 together. As I set out on the 4th of December, the Government has now begun the process of repealing and replacing the Legacy Act through a proposed remedial order, and we will bring forward primary legislation, including to reform ICRA, In preparing for this, I will continue to talk to all interested parties.
If you get dazzled.
Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney described Sean Brown as a man of goodwill and integrity who represented something better than we've grown used to. We meet the day before his family are forced back to court, and we meet in the week of the anniversary of the Kingsmill massacre, where the sole survivor, brave Alan Black, is waiting for a long overdue Ombudsman report. Those two incidents were among the most nakedly sectarian in a squalid conflict, but decades on, those who created victims in and out of uniform are still driving the process, and not those victims who have lived with the consequences for decades. Will the Minister commit to ensuring that his forthcoming proposals, which I know he is working intensively on, remove the NIO veto under the guise of national security? Will he commit to root and branch reform of the ICRIR? Will he commit to exposing collusive behaviour, and will he hold to the standards that were agreed by all parties and both governments at Stormont House?
Well, I say to my honourable friend, I've bet both the Brown family and Alan Black, the sole survivor of the Kingsmill massacre, and the trauma they've been through is very hard for anyone else to appreciate. We look forward, all of us, to the Ombudsman report on the Kingsmill massacre being published. I want to see a full investigation into the murder of Sean Brown, but there is an appeal on wider matters and I can't comment further. And I am committed to fundamental reform of the Independent Commission.
My first full-time job in the early 2000s was setting up and running a peacemaking programme for young people in Northern Ireland, and so I'm pleased that the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery was salvaged from the remains of the Legacy Act. However, I am concerned that in the discussion around legacy, that the goal of cross-community reconciliation is being treated as secondary to information recovery for individuals, as important as that is. So can I ask my right honourable friend, how will he ensure that ICRA works with key stakeholders in order to foster cross-community reconciliation in Northern Ireland?
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important point, and I would say to him that enabling families who have suffered for so long and not found answers to what happened is a fundamental part of enabling the process of reconciliation in Northern Ireland to take place. And the truth is we have to work on both.
Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State knows that I agree with many aspects of the repeal of the Legacy Act. But the Policy Exchange report this week, and as the newspapers have stated this morning, raises some significant concerns about the repeal of Section 46 and 47 in that Act. Can I urge him to return to the previous cross-party position that we have to block compensation payments to terrorists such as Jerry Adams?
Well, I have indeed seen that report, and the problem is that the approach set out in the Legacy Act, in this respect and many others, has been found to be unlawful. Unlawful. Now, of course, as the last government did, we will continue to see if we can find a lawful way of dealing with the issue that he has identified, and that work will continue.
Gregory Capp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that the job of the Commission in helping people to deal with the past is made much more difficult when we have incidents like when the Sinn Féin First Minister Michelle O'Neill reprehensively spoke and attended a commemoration of 3 IRA terrorists who died when the bomb they were transporting through County Londonderry in 1971 exploded prematurely, killing them rather than the innocent people they intended to murder. And now the possibility of former Sinn Féin leader and terrorist Jerry Adams may be about to receive compensation.
I say to the honourable gentleman that as I alluded to a moment ago, the process of reconciliation and coming to terms with the past is a difficult and itself a troubled process. And lots of people have been on a journey, and we need to continue to see that journey followed. People will express their views about the stance that different people have taken, but I welcome, since he mentioned the First Minister, the fact that for the first time she attended the Remembrance Sunday commemorations.
I've not looked at the bunch. Alex Bogart, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to return to the question just raised by my right honourable friend, the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. The fact of the matter is that in the case of Gerry Adams, when the previous government passed its legislation, the Labour Party was in favour of the amendments made in another place, which ruled out compensation to people like Gerry Adams and others similarly detained in the 1970s. Why has the government now changed its position?
It is the courts that have found those clauses to be unlawful. And the fact of the matter is that the last government passed legislation to enable terrorists to get immunity. The last government passed legislation to deny people in Northern Ireland the right to bring civil claims, including against terrorists. The Conservative Party has never apologised for doing both of those things. It's about time that they did.
Let's return to the matter of Gerry Adams. The Secretary of State, and I'm sorry to say I must correct the Secretary of State. The High Court found that, those provisions in the Legacy Act were unlawful. But it is well within the Secretary of State's power to appeal that judgment. He has dropped that appeal. And I don't wish to teach the Secretary of State to suck constitutional eggs, but he will know full well that it is also within the sovereign power of this Parliament to give legal basis to the Carltonal doctrines which have been in place since the 1940s. Or would he rather pay compensation to Gerry Adams and people like him?
Nobody wants to see that, but the Supreme Court judgment the Supreme Court judgment which ruled that the interim custody orders following internment were not lawfully put in place, in which the Carltona principle was much discussed, was in 2020. The last government did nothing about that for 3 years until they belatedly accepted an amendment in the House of Lords, which has now been found to be unlawful. It is a complex and a difficult question. The last government found it difficult, but we will continue to follow the same path that they did to see whether it's possible to discover a legal means of dealing with the problem he has identified.
Chris Vince.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister. Secretary.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 5, 7, 9 and 10 together. The Government's mission is to encourage growth in Northern Ireland through increased investment, job creation and higher living standards. The Government is working closely with the Northern Ireland Executive to develop Invest 2035, the UK's modern industrial strategy.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I thank the Secretary of State for his response. Northern Ireland's economy has strong and dynamic sectors, from agri-food to aerospace to shipbuilding to cybersecurity. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that actually Northern Ireland has a vital part to play in the industrial strategy?
It certainly does, and my honourable friend alludes to a number of the great strengths of the Northern Ireland economy. The deal with Holland and Wolf I referred to earlier is another sign of the Government's commitment, and of course the Northern Ireland economy has access to both the EU and the UK market.
Alan Devil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State share my optimism that UK government funding for all 4 Northern Ireland city and growth deals confirmed in the autumn provides a great basis for all of Northern Ireland to generate growth and opportunities?
I certainly do, and I've been greatly impressed by the commitment of those involved in developing the growth deals to invest in boosting economic growth in their areas.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Secretary of State update the House on what recent discussions he's had with the Executive about steps to take to increase revenue in order to help deliver longer-term financial sustainability to help grow the economy in Northern Ireland?
I have had a number of discussions, Mr. Speaker, with the Executive on that subject, and I'm pleased to see that the draft budget for next year contains a plan to raise further revenue, which will meet the £113 million requirement that was part of the budget restoration agreement. It is really important the Executive raises additional funds to meet the challenges of improving public services.
Dan Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many dynamic tech and digital companies at the vanguard of the mission for economic growth in Northern Ireland. Does the Minister agree with me that these industries are critical to Northern Ireland's economic future? And what steps are being taken by the Government to support these industries to grow to their full potential?
Well, there were already been discussions with businesses in Northern Ireland about the part they can play in the industrial strategy, but cyber security is a really good example of a huge strength of the Northern Ireland economy, where many companies, including from the United States of America, are investing because of the skill and expertise that is to be found there.
Saoirse Eastwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State and the Minister for their responses so far, and indeed in one of the responses I note that Northern Ireland was highlighted as having dual market access. So on that basis, would the Secretary of State and Minister agree with me that initiatives like the Dublin-Belfast Economic Corridor in my constituency of Lagan Valley need supported so we can make the most of our economic opportunities?
I do indeed think that the Belfast Economic Corridor is a really good thing. We support it, and I look forward to seeing it develop and succeed.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Agriculture is really important to the economy of Northern Ireland. In Scotland, we breed excellent bulls, but it's very hard to sell them and get them into Northern Ireland because of the regulations and red tape, and vice versa for Irish bulls coming to Scotland. Could I ask the Secretary of State to see if we could make it a bit easier for farmers on both sides?
I will look into the matter that the honourable gentleman raised, and I will come back to him.
Jim Allister.
This week the Prime Minister has spoken of the unbridled economic opportunities in developing AI. But of course, it is not an unbridled opportunity for Northern Ireland, because instead of living under British regulations that affect the AI, we live under much more restrictive EU regulations. So when would the Secretary of State move to release Northern Ireland from the restrictions of foreign jurisdiction under the EU?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, the substantive provisions of the EU AI Act do not currently apply in Northern Ireland, would only apply following an agreement in the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, and any decision would be subject to the democratic safeguard mechanisms in Schedule 6B of the Northern Ireland Act 1998.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his Union Connectivity review, Lord Hendy, now a minister in this government, identified that upgrading the A75 would have significant economic benefits, not just for Northern Ireland, but for the whole of the United Kingdom. There was another fatal accident on that road in my constituency last week. So will the Secretary of State join with the Secretary of State for Scotland to put pressure on the Scottish Government to finally move on upgrading this vital economic route?
It is indeed a vital economic route, and like the honourable member, I look forward to seeing it improved, not least in the interests of safely as quickly as possible.
Sammy Wilson.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The updated EU General Product Safety Regulations largely formalises how businesses are already operating in the UK, and the majority of businesses have adapted to continue trading within the UK and with the EU. In December, the Government published guidance for businesses on the application of the regulation in Northern Ireland. The Secretary of State has this week met with ministerial colleagues and will keep this under review.
Sammy Wilson.
As a result of these EU regulations, thousands of consumers in Northern Ireland are denied goods from GB, and rather than adapt, businesses in GB have simply abandoned the Northern Ireland market. At the same time, this week, DEFRA has banned the import of meat from Germany, where there's been foot and mouth disease outbreak, but has not extended that ban to Northern Ireland because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. While the EU protects its market, the UK appears to have abandoned the internal market of its own country. What is the Secretary of State going to do to redress this?
This government is absolutely committed to ensuring the smooth flow of goods across the UK internal market. We understand under GPSR that for many companies they've adapted easily, it's more difficult. The Secretary of State has met with the Minister of Business this week about further guidance and insurance, and is continuing to do so.
Presley Fox.
Question number 8.
Minister.
There are many pressures on businesses that we are constantly assessing and talking with businesses about. Job creation in Northern Ireland, the member is right to raise. It's a priority for this government, and we are supporting businesses in many ways, including through Invest NI's fund for small businesses and through directly supporting job seekers through funding for employment support schemes.
Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the warm welcome. How does the Minister expect businesses in Northern Ireland to grow and invest in their communities, given they have to pay the enormous tax increases imposed by the Chancellor?
Minister.
Even after accounting for employer national insurance contribution impacts, the Office of Budget Responsibility expects level of real wages will raise by 3% now. Raising the revenue to fill the £22 billion black hole requires difficult decisions, but they will result in improved public services, which is good for all people in Northern Ireland.
Dole.
12, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
I welcome the industry-led deal that will see Navantia UK purchase Harland & Wolff's 4 shipyards in the UK, including Belfast. The government has worked closely with Navantia UK to secure the future of the yards, the Fleet Solid Support Programme, and around 1,000 jobs across the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my optimism that now the future of the Harland & Wolff yard has been secured, the yard itself will be able to secure future orders?
I certainly do, and that is one of the great benefits of the commercial agreement that's been reached by Navantia to buy Harland & Wolff, and the adjustments that were made to the contract to ensure that the Fleet Solid Support ships could go ahead. This is a great facility, and it is open for business, including for other orders.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, one of my companies in my constituency of Strangford is one of the people who will suffer because of the administration of Harland & Wolff. In particular, this small family firm, and I won't mention it all for Hansard, will lose £500,000 of money. Now, the impact upon them and others is quite catastrophic. Can I ask the Minister what can be done to help those companies through the administration of Harland & Wolff who will find themselves either not able to trade in the future or losing entirely?
I do recognise the concerns which the honourable gentleman has raised. This is the product of the failure of the old Harland & Wolff, but it now falls to Navantia excuse me, to decide which of those invoices they wish to pay, and they will want to secure a relationship with suppliers who will be contributing to the Fleet Solid Support Ship programme.